So today we're going to be taking a look at organic macromolecules. Okay, so we also call them biomolecules. These are molecules that are in living things that we make and that we need them and use these molecules. So that's why it says bio, because bio means life or living things. Now, I'm sure you've heard of the word organic before, especially let's say in a supermarket. And organic, when you think of it, it might mean like fresh, no chemicals are used, things like that. But organic means in science and biology specifically, and chemistry, it means anything that has carbon. So you have carbon in your body, you are considered organic. Other living things have carbon in their bodies, so they are organic too. Now, macromolecules that are organic, remember that macro means big. Okay, it's a big molecule, meaning it's made up of many atoms. Now, this big molecule is made up of even smaller pieces called monomers. So when you see the prefix mono, it means one piece, okay? And you put these small monomers or small pieces together and you build them or put them together to make a polymer. And poly means many pieces. So these words, macromolecule, biomolecules, and polymers, sometimes you'll hear them all meaning the same thing. They are big molecules. So you can think of it like this. So polymers, macromolecules, and biomolecules are made up of smaller pieces called monomers, kind of like a Lego piece. Okay, now you put all those Lego pieces together to make a structure, let's say like this Lego house. So this Lego piece would be like a monomer. It's just one single piece. You put them all together and it'll make a polymer. And like I said, you can use the word macromolecule because that means pretty much the same thing, or biomolecules. So this house represents those three words: macromolecule, biomolecule, polymer, and they're made up of smaller pieces called monomer. We're going to take a look at 4 different types of macromolecules this week: carbohydrates, lipids, nucleic acids, and proteins. And each one of these big molecules we call macromolecules. They're made up of smaller pieces called monomers, and each one of these macromolecules has a special name for its monomer. So let's start with lipids. For lipids, okay, they're mostly made out of 3 types of atoms: carbon, which we represent as a capital C, hydrogen with a capital H, and oxygen with a capital O. And when we put the carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen atoms together, we'll make these monomers, these like the Lego pieces of fatty acids and glycerol. Okay, so let's take a look. Again, like I said, here the atoms are carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. When we put a lot of these atoms together, we'll make the monomer of fatty acid. Here's fatty acid and glycerol. And I can see here the carbon atoms, the hydrogen atoms, and the oxygen atoms, okay? We put glycerol with a lot of fatty acids and we put them together to make one big lipid. Okay, now I know you can see these lines, but these lines represent, sometimes scientists will represent how atoms are linked by drawing lines or shapes. So this is a lipid, okay? A lipid is a molecule, like I said, that has lots of these atoms: carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen atoms. When you put these atoms together, you'll make these like Lego bricks, these monomers called fatty acids and glycerol. When you put a glycerol with lots of fatty acids together, you get one big lipid. Now, what's the point of the lipid? The lipid's function is to store energy for long-term use. So when we need energy, we can use the lipids in our body and store that energy until we need it, okay? The cell membrane is also made up of lipids. So here's a cell, and the outside border of this plant cell, and here's an animal cell. The outside area is the cell membrane, and the cell membrane is made out of lipids. Lipids can also help with insulation. That means they keep our bodies warm. So we have lipids in our body, and that's these are some of the things that they do for us. They store energy, They're part of our cells. They're the outside borders of our cells and protect our cells. And then also they help us to keep warm. Now, examples of lipids that we can see in our bodies or maybe in other foods would be, let's say, fats, oils. So it could be oils like vegetable or corn oil, waxes, so like earwax or beeswax or wax that you would find on leaves. Okay, so lipids are important for living things. The other thing that we're going to take a look at is carbohydrates. So carbohydrates are also made out of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen atoms, but the carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen atoms are in a 1 to 2 to 1 ratio. What does that mean? For every one carbon, there are twice as many hydrogens and one oxygen. So oxygen and carbon have the same amount, and hydrogen would be doubled. That's different from lipids because lipids have carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, but there's not a ratio like this. So what do I mean? Here's an example. For every carbon here, there's 6 carbon atoms. So that means that the hydrogen atoms have to be doubled. So instead of 6 hydrogen, I'm going to double it. So that's why there's 12 hydrogen atoms. And then the oxygen atoms will be the same amount as the carbon atom. So that's why it's 6, because the carbon is also 6. All right, C6H12O6, that should be familiar. It's a glucose molecule, okay, which is a carbohydrate. Now, the monomer, the small pieces that come together to make up a carbohydrate, okay, would be a monosaccharide. I'm seeing that prefix again, mono. So mono means one, and saccharide means sugar. So if we have one sugar molecule, okay, we put a bunch of sugar molecules, it'll make a carbohydrate. So monosaccharides are things that are sweet. So we can find monosaccharides in like glucose. Glucose we talked about. We find it in plants when they do photosynthesis. There's also glucose in our bodies as animals. Fructose is a type of carbohydrate. It's a type of sugar that's seen in fruits, okay? And galactose is a type of carbohydrate or sugar that we see in milk. If you see, just like we did with lipids, scientists kind of draw lines, or in this case, they draw hexagons or pentagons to represent sugars. So monosaccharides is just one sugar molecule, and they're found in things that are sweet. So when you think of monosaccharides, they're simple carbohydrates. They're sweet, and they're only, let's say, one sugar molecule. But some carbohydrates are disaccharide. That means they're made up of not just one sugar molecule, but 2. Di means 2. So here are some examples of disaccharides. So sucrose, like what you would find in table sugar, is a combination of glucose and fructose. So here we have one sugar molecule and it's attached to another sugar molecule. Lactose is an example of a sugar, a disaccharide that you would see in milk. It's a combination of galactose and glucose. So people who are lactose intolerant, they can't break down this sugar very well. So because they can't break down the sugar, they might feel certain symptoms, like maybe they'll have stomach issues. Some people might feel nauseous. They don't feel good because the sugar that's in milk, they can't break it down. So those are disaccharides. Disaccharides are also carbohydrates. Okay, and then also we have polysaccharides. We've seen the prefix poly before. Poly means many, and saccharide means sugar. So these are many sugar molecules put together. And because there's so many of them, they're not simple carbohydrates. We call them complex carbohydrates. And yes, even though there's many sugar molecules put together, they're not sweet, okay? This is where we would see like an example of a polysaccharide. Many sugar molecules put together would be a starch. And starch is what we can find in potatoes, bread, rice, and pasta. And they are example of complex carbohydrates. Now, if you see here are all the different saccharides. We have a monosaccharide, just one sugar. We have a disaccharide. We have 2 sugars put together. And then we have a polysaccharide. We have all these sugars put together. Now, which one would our bodies take longer to break? a monosaccharide, a disaccharide, or a polysaccharide? Well, it would take our bodies longer to break down a polysaccharide because there's more sugar molecules that we need to break down. So because there's more sugar molecules that we need to break down, we can actually get more energy from it. So that's why it's better to eat complex carbohydrates like pasta, rice, potatoes, than let's say simple carbohydrates, because they both give us energy, but we can get energy for more energy when we eat complex carbohydrates. So what's the main function of carbohydrates? It gives us short-term energy. Okay. It also provides structure for bodies of insects. Okay. And it's called chitin. It also, for plants, it makes up another border around their cells called cell walls. Now, examples of carbohydrates: soda, candy, and fruits. They have carbohydrates in them. And like I said, we call them simple carbohydrates because they're either made up of 1 or 2 sugars. Okay. And then potatoes, bread, pasta, rice, those are examples of complex carbohydrates. They have many sugars put together. So make sure that you have filled out your notes. Okay. And if you need to rewind, make sure you rewind and fill out the notes and then fill out this graphic organizer.